Hello everyone, I'm David Vaucher. Welcome to Return on Racing. Return on Racing is powered by Vaucher Analytics, which helps drivers and race teams drive efficiencies off track so they can fuel success on track. Return on Racing is also brought to you by the Motorsports Sponsorship Accelerator, the most cutting edge resource out there for finding, maintaining, and growing long-term sponsorship relationships. At the time I'm recording this, the 2025 Indy 500 is a couple of weeks behind us. Congratulations to Alex Palou for taking home his first Indy 500 win, and in the way that the Indy 500 tends to go, this was a crazy and eventful race in a unique way from all of the ones that came before it. In fact, I think you can say the same thing about the INDYCAR series in general. It really is just a ton of fun to watch, and if you were to sit down and watch an INDYCAR race, you might struggle to understand how anything could be going wrong because at a surface level, cars are on track and the racing product is tremendous. However, IndyCar is facing a problem, and to be fair, this is a problem faced by many other series, and that is growing costs. So today, on this episode of Return on Racing, let's talk about addressing cost escalations in IndyCar via growth. Let's get started. Now, IndyCar is facing extreme cost escalations. In a recent article for Racer.com, Marshall Pruitt gave some hard data to back up the assertion that cost escalations are hitting the Heritage Racing Series very hard. In his piece, Pruitt writes that 2024 IndyCar budgets soared as teams faced substantial cost increases, from 20% to over 40%, driven by new components, rising driver and crew salaries, and stiff competition for top talent. If you want more quantitative data around this, the second episode of Return on Racing had to do with safety equipment cost escalations, and I will link that in the show notes. While hybrid powertrains were often named as a culprit in this article by Marshall Pruitt, owners also cited labor expenses as the biggest burden, with some paying premium wages to retain employees. Despite hopes that costs might stabilize in 2025, many anticipate further hikes due to continued inflation, upgraded car parts, and an ongoing struggle to secure skilled personnel. As I said earlier, IndyCar is not alone. While these cost escalations are unfortunate and notable for their magnitude, they are not exclusive to IndyCar. Indeed, cost increases continue to be a talking point in all major racing series, and certainly at the grassroots levels, where teams do not have the backing of larger organizations behind them. And even when they do, this can still be problematic. These cost increases can broadly be categorized into three areas. You have nominal inflation, technical inflation, and market inflation. I've covered these before on Return on Racing, but it's always good to remind everyone what we're talking about. So first, let's talk about nominal inflation. This is the inflation that occurs naturally in a healthy economy, where 2% is usually targeted by central banks under the assumption that some rise in prices is preferable to a deflationary price environment. It is this inflation that ensures, as team owner Dale Coyne says in the article, that nothing goes down. Technical inflation is the second source of cost escalation in racing. This is cost inflation driven by regulation changes in pursuit of some larger goal, such as increasing safety, increasing the quality of the on-track product, or serving manufacturers' goals, such as marketing the use of alternative power production systems. And as I said, I put some quantitative data behind regulatory changes for safety in a previous episode of Return on Racing, and that will be linked in the show notes. And finally, we have market inflation. This is the inflation that occurs in a competitive market, above and beyond the nominal baseline. Team owners in the Racer article refer to this several times with regards to the labor market, in which competition for the best people has pushed costs upward sharply following a period of relatively depressed salaries. Because we have to keep in mind, whereas you can relatively easily manufacture new parts, it's very difficult to train an engineer and then just automatically give them 20 years of experience. In this environment, it would be very tempting to say that the answer is cutting costs, but cost cutting alone is not the way out. While there are certainly theoretical solutions to alleviate the pain felt in the areas listed in the Racer article, they tend to be difficult to implement in practice. These hypothetical measures, if not very carefully considered and applied, can produce undesirable secondary effects which make for a less satisfying racing experience. In this case, even if teams and the IndyCar series manage to cut costs, they may drive away fans, both established ones and new ones, so you're preventing new fans from coming in. And this creates a deflationary spiral in which, yes, costs do decrease, but so does the audience for IndyCar. The most glaring issue, however, is more general and is applicable to any business in any industry trying to manage its finances. There is only so much that one can cut. While it is always important to operate efficiently and be vigilant to organizational cost creep, the most long-lasting solution to controlling costs is to outrun them with increasing market size and revenues. Now, in the January 7th, 2025 episode of the Race INDYCAR podcast, in response to the issue of driver sponsorship, which is itself tightly entwined with rising costs, Indy 500 runner-up J.R. Hildebrand stated the following, quote, "I've had a hell of a time, just to be frank, finding sponsorship for INDYCAR, going INDYCAR racing. And the question that begs for me is, yeah, it would be nice if the number I was asking for was less. If I could go ask for 450 instead of 800. That would be nice. But really, the thing that would make a difference is if this was actually just worth 1.5. If the value proposition for doing this was clear and elevated." End quote. This quote touches succinctly on two very important points. First, the external cost environment is colliding with INDYCAR's difficulties in creating a perception of value in line with its objectively phenomenal heritage and on-track product, which is just such a fantastically fun time to watch. The second point is that fueling growth rather than imposing, or more realistically, attempting to impose, austerity measures is likely the more sustainable path to addressing the current cost escalations. The path to doing so lies in issues that many industry insiders have been highlighting for years, the most pressing of which are as follows. Number one, the age and makeup of INDYCAR fans, which at the moment does skew heavily towards older white men. Number two, the age of the INDYCARs themselves, with the Dallara DW12 embarking on its 14th season as of 2025, and which just recently was announced to have been pushed back another year to a 2028 introduction. And number three, the tenuous nature of manufacturer involvement. Only Honda and Chevrolet provide engines for the INDYCAR chassis in 2025, and according to quotes by Marshall Pruitt on several occasions, the former may already have one foot out the door. These are very serious structural issues, which could be problematic in any cost environment, but which become more so when the internal problems facing INDYCAR, the so-called spec series, whose very nature is supposed to be cost mitigating, collide with the inflationary environment facing the entire world in the mid-2020s. Now, in the spirit of not just laying out problems, I really want to provide solutions. Here's some high-level proposals to increase the long-term value of INDYCAR. Now, given the nature of INDYCAR's problems, there are no silver bullets. The harsh reality is that no measures taken to address its structural issues will yield instantaneous results. This reality is more stark when one considers that the issues listed previously have been going on for years, so their negative impacts have been compounding over that time frame. However, if serious work is done to address them, it is possible that over time the results will compound themselves positively season after season. So while costs may continue to increase, INDYCAR itself would grow in such a way as to mitigate the perceived severity of these cost increases. Below are several broad areas which INDYCAR could explore to boost its profile and, in doing so, counterbalance the cost issues that currently face every team owner. So first, addressing the competitive labor market via growth. Labor costs are listed repeatedly as a driver of cost escalation due to a shortage of qualified personnel, which has led some teams to have to source expertise from abroad. And here we're talking about crew chiefs, high-level engineers. It's that type of skilled labor. Rather than force relief by attempting to cap salaries or compensation growth, it would be beneficial to grow the pipeline of qualified professionals over time, thereby growing the supply side of the supply-demand balance, and thus, over time, providing some downwards pressure on personnel costs. Now, this is very easy to say. In practice, of course, it is quite difficult to implement and will take some time. The first step to doing so would be to strengthen recruitment pipelines as much as possible at both the team and the INDYCAR series level. This would entail developing structured INDYCAR-backed training programs to grow new talent rather than relying on a limited pool of existing experts. Ideally, this pipeline would be diverse, and new entrants to the INDYCAR labor pool would go on to then evangelize the series to their peer groups, thus helping to diversify INDYCAR's current and future fan bases even further. So that's the first proposal. The second proposal would be to draft every regulation with manufacturers in mind. I've got a really exciting 3-part series coming your way about this. It is my view that really manufacturers are the lifeblood of a racing series because without them, you don't have a good racing product, and you don't have fans. So they are a paramount, perhaps the paramount constituency when considering a series. Now, on this note, the WEC and IMSA have experienced healthy growth recently as a result of a rule set which allows cars from one series to compete in another, and which provides substantial freedom to manufacturers in how they design their cars. While the nature and technical goals of those series differ strongly from IndyCar, the philosophy that underpins their rule sets is still applicable to the latter. Indeed, if cost barriers are lowered, not eliminated necessarily, but lowered, and manufacturers have some leeway in pursuing their own growth agendas, they will come. This, and a balance of performance, of course, but we're going to set that aside here, is how you end up with a series where a Peugeot 9XA relies heavily on the brand's design language and looks completely different from an Aston Martin Valkyrie, whose V12 engine is the only non-hybrid design and is meant to signal the parent company's commitment to enthusiast-focused automobiles. The results speak for themselves. Manufacturers keep signing up, with Hyundai's Genesis brand set for a 2026 WEC debut, and Ford and McLaren announcing plans to join the year afterwards. This in turn creates a virtuous circle whereby more and more fans show up to events, and the momentum behind each series just builds and builds and builds. While IndyCar's regulations may not look at all like those of its endurance-focused counterparts, there is no doubt that serving manufacturers' interests in addition to addressing teams' concerns about rising costs must be top of mind for IndyCar. Because if you address the manufacturer concerns, my hypothesis is that the series will grow, and that will allow revenues to outpace cost inflation. Next, we have creating a wide on-ramp to IndyCar, and this is crucial to having that rapid growth. No discussion about growing a racing series would be complete without mentioning Netflix's Drive to Survive. And again, I've got a really exciting 3-part series on this. Stay tuned to Return on Racing News. Anyways, the hit series, with its slick production and accessibility via the highly popular Netflix platform, will become a case study in marketing, and rightly so, if it isn't already. Though some F1 purists have disagreed with how the show creates drama between drivers, there is no denying the role the series has played in growing F1's audience, particularly in the key and lucrative US market. New IndyCar broadcast partner Fox has made strides with its well-received driver-focused promotional campaign, which was actually given Super Bowl airtime. But it's hard to see how these rather sporadic spots will have the same impact in activating new fans as a long-running, compelling series which is perpetually available on a juggernaut streaming platform. While Drive to Survive IndyCar Edition may not be the final form of an on-ramp initiative, Netflix's effort surely provides a very solid template. But this should really be just one arrow in the quiver of making sure that everyone that can possibly be interested in IndyCar checks it out, satisfies that curiosity, and then stays behind as a fan. And on that point, here is the final proposal on this list, which is to never miss out on a marketing opportunity. Again, Formula One sets a template for others to follow in how it approached the unveiling of teams' 2025 liveries. For the first time ever, the series organized a star-studded event in London where all the teams unveiled the look of their newest cars. While it's too early to know the long-term impact of this event, it got people talking and only served to build up excitement for the 2025 season. This event is particularly relevant in the context of IndyCar, whose current spec chassis is a decade and a half old and which has still not been revealed to the public in anticipation of its 2028 on-track debut. Hopefully, IndyCar will provide all the fanfare such a debut requires, but more generally speaking, IndyCar should, and presumably is, at least we hope, looking at any and all opportunities to engage the broadest and most diverse demographic possible. Under the hypothesis that young and diverse fans will help the sport grow, any and all options to meet those future customers where they congregate should be on the table: music, sports, and fashion, among others. The currently under-the-radar status of IndyCar works in its favor because at this point, it is behind Formula One in cultural crossover, and the options available to it are for all intents and purposes limitless because the on-track product is so good. So some concluding thoughts here. This episode of Return on Racing only scratches the surface of what IndyCar could do to mitigate its cost troubles. But the good news is that its core product, the racing, is fantastic. And I repeat this, and I know I'm preaching to the crowd, but sitting down to an IndyCar race is just several hours of pure joy. F1 commentator Will Buxton recently left F1 to join the IndyCar broadcast team, calling this series racing action the greatest racing on earth. It's hard to argue with him, as the on track action is always fast and unpredictable, combining the science of an F1 race with, let's all admit it, a little bit of the chaos that makes NASCAR so appealing. And that's not even accounting for the fact that INDYCAR is home to the legendary Indy 500. If INDYCAR can leverage its rich history successfully, it should be well set to grow and mitigate, if not entirely eliminate, the cost inflation which is presently generating headlines. I want to thank you all for spending your time with me here on this episode of Return on Racing. If you like these insights and want more like them, I'd ask that you please consider subscribing to the Return on Racing newsletter. This is the weekly newsletter from Voce Analytics covering actionable motorsport strategy, cost breakdowns, and sponsor intel, all in less than 500 words, delivered weekly directly to your inbox. If you want to sign up for that, you can do so right from the front page of the Voce Analytics website. That is www.voceanalytics.com. I want to thank you so much again for spending your time with me, and I look forward to speaking with you on the next episode of Return on Racing.